6 blind men in a village. Each day one day, the villagers told them, hey, there's an elephant in the village today. They had no idea what an elephant was. They decided, even though we would not be able to see it, let us go and feel it anyway. All of them went where the elephant was, and every one of them touched the elephant. Hey, the elephant is a pillar, said the first man who touched his leg. Oh no, it is like a rope, said the second man who touched his tail. Oh no, it is like a thick branch of a tree, said the third man who touched the trunk. It is like a big hand fan, said the fourth man who touched his ear. It is like a huge wall, said the fifth man who touched the belly. It is like a solid pipe, said the sixth man who touched the tusk of the elephant. They began to argue about the elephant, and every one of them insisted that he was right. It looked like they were getting very agitated. A wise man was passing by, and he saw this. He stopped and asked them, "What is the matter?" They said, "We cannot agree on what the elephant is like." Each one of them told what he thought the elephant was like. The wise man calmly explained to them, "All of you are right. The reason every one of you is telling it differently is because each one of you touched a different part of the elephant. So actually, the elephant has all of those features that you all say." "Oh," everyone said. There was no more fight. They felt happy that they were all right. It's interesting that the story ends with such a happy ending, that all the blind men are happy that each one of them were correct about their understanding of the elephant. However, while they are right about their experience of the elephant, they still don't understand exactly what an elephant actually is, because they only experienced one part of the elephant. All they can do is describe the aspect of the elephant they experienced. And they are still blind to what the elephant is in its entirety, because they never experienced the whole elephant. It's also interesting that although this is an ancient Middle Eastern story, it does speak to us today, because we often play the part of the blind man, particularly when it comes to our social lives. When it comes to the public, we tend to like to follow or admire celebrities or public figures. And often we know about them, or we follow them through what the media or others tell us, but yet we don't always know the whole story. Lance Armstrong this week, on Wednesday, stepped down as chairman of the Livestrong board, the foundation he founded. And Nike also removed their endorsement of the Livestrong brand, all because of allegations of steroid usage during his cycling career. Now, whether you were a fan of professional cycling or not, most of us had heard the story of Lance. Most of us knew what had happened, that he was a professional cyclist who came down with cancer, testicular cancer, and had a very advanced stage of it. But yet he was able to defeat it and came back to ride and win seven Tour de France's, the most prestigious cycling event in the world. And then he started the Livestrong Foundation to support cancer research, and which has helped thousands upon millions of people. He is probably one of the closest things that America has at this time, or had, to an icon or a hero, because everyone knew him, and his story was so uplifting. But all that we saw and we knew, we were still blind to parts of Armstrong's life. And like taking a blindfold off, when we heard this news, we were no longer blind to the possible aspects of Lance's life, to the likelihood that his resurgence was not just all on hard work, but may have actually been because of cheating and steroids as well. And all of a sudden, he's not such an iconic or heroic figure to us. Personally, part of me wants to hold on. I want to continue to see Lance as the person that he was built up to be before the allegations were released. Because his story really helped me to come through a hard time in my athletic career in college, when I dealt with multiple injuries in a row and really questioned if I was going to be able to run again. But reading his story gave me the courage to come back. But again, there is another part of me that sees the other aspects of his career, the allegations, and the possibility that they're true. So I battle as to whether I deny the new part that's been revealed to me, or do I claim it as part of my whole experience as Lance Armstrong and all that he has done? I have a choice. I can continue to be blind and experience Lance as the glorified ear that I first experienced him as. Or do I acknowledge the other aspects of him and see him as the whole elephant? And it's a challenging choice that we all must make. Cancer survivors and cyclist fans and Lance Armstrong fans. Do we acknowledge our blindness and choose to see the entire Lance Armstrong? As much as we experience this blindness in the public realm, Tiger Woods would be another example of our blindness being revealed to us. We also experience being blind in our personal lives. Oftentimes in personal relationships, we experience or know only one aspect of a person while being blind to the rest of them. One place where you go where this blindness is revealed to you is college. A place where very little can be hidden because you're around people all the time. If you're messy, they will know it. If you're lazy, they will know it. If you snore, if you wear different colored contact lenses, whatever, they will be known and you will know it about someone else. I find it very fascinating, the stories of best friends from high school who go off to be roommates together their first year of college. Because while for some it works out really well, for other ones it often, it didn't go so well. Because in high school, we experience the aspects of people that they want us to experience. You're able to come to school and share what you want with others, but then you're able to come home and you can be the person that you really are or that you really want to be. If you're clean, if you want to be clean at school, your locker may look amazing, but you get home and there's clothes all over the floor in your room and you've got stuff everywhere. I was not one such person. My locker was as dirty as my room was. But in college, all those blind aspects are revealed. You can discover that your best friend, who you thought you knew, is actually a night owl and you're an early bird. Is actually messy and you're clean. Is actually a socialite and you are more of a personal person. You discover there's a whole lot to your best friend that you didn't know. And in some cases, that does challenge the friendship because you now know each other on a deeper level, and you know that almost is someone different than you did before. Another relationship where this is revealed to us is marriage. You live with someone, you go to bed with them, you wake up with them every morning, and some of the guards and shields are let down. You're no longer blind to some of the aspects that you were blind to before, or maybe you didn't want to acknowledge. I felt like this was especially the case for my wife, Rudy, and I, because we spent 3 years long distance while I was at seminary in Atlanta. She was working in Omaha. And every time we saw each other, which was only about 2 times per year, and even months within our marriage, we saw the person that we wanted to see, the person that we met before that distance, before we were apart, the person that we were used to. And we're blind to the person that they were becoming. Because they had changed, but yet we didn't exactly want to see that change. We wanted to see the person that we were comfortable with. You know, during 3 years, your life changed a lot. You mature. Well, Rudy claims that she matured. She said, I stayed in college as I was still living on campus. But Rudy matured. And our personalities changed as we dealt with the distance and all the stress that came with it. And we developed into our own persons. And for a while, no matter how we experienced each other anew, we were blind to those aspects that were foreign to us. Because they didn't match up with who we thought the other person was, or who they were supposed to be, because they were that way when we left. Even now, after being together for 1.5 years, after being married for almost 1.5 years, we continue to discover new aspects of each other. And we must open our eyes to see what we have been previously blind to. Now, for those who haven't had these experiences yet, for those who are young, or those who are old, or anywhere in between that haven't had these experiences, it sounds like I'm painting a pretty grim picture. But those of us who have had these experiences know that not being blind anymore and experiencing all aspects of another person, while it's a difficult journey to take, it's a journey that leads to great growth by all parties involved, because it helps build a stronger relationship and a deeper relationship. The reason you make some of your best friends during college and you continue to be friends with them beyond college, and the reason that marriage partners often speak of themselves as being their best friends, is because there are fewer blind spots in those relationships. And they know each other on a deeper and more intimate level. When we're no longer blind, then you get to know and experience the whole person. You get to have that more intimate and personal relationship. You're able to experience and gain an understanding of the whole elephant. Now, before we go any further, I just want everyone to take a deep breath and relax. There's not a hidden message in the sermon saying that I have red flags that you are blind to, or that I have skeletons in the closet. But the combination of these public and personal experiences of blindness help us to understand the experiences of James and John and the rest of the disciples with Jesus. Now, the disciples know Jesus. In fact, they're probably closer than BFFs. They've spent at least 3 years together, day and night. They know whether Jesus is messy or clean. They know how Jesus likes his fish cooked. And they know what annoys him, and if he maybe even has any annoying habits himself. But Jesus is more than a person. And the disciples have finally come to understand that Jesus is the Messiah. As just a few chapters before in chapter 8, Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do others say that I am?" And the disciples say, "They say you're Elijah. They say you're John the Baptist. They say you're another prophet." But when Jesus asks who they say he is, Peter, who likes to speak on behalf of the whole group most of the time, answers that they know Jesus is the Messiah. Hooray! They're finally beginning to experience Jesus as God incarnate, as Savior, as Messiah. But yet, the disciples are still blind to who Jesus is, because they don't or they can't understand that Jesus' revelation of being the Messiah really means. In Jewish traditions, particularly in Jesus' time, the Messiah was the king from the line of David, who was going to be the physical, military, and political leader of Israel, who defeated all of Israel's enemies, restored Israel to the political power they once were, and restore Israel's righteousness and blessings from God that Israel had once lost. However, this was not what Jesus had revealed to the disciples about what his messiahship meant. 3 times between the time that the disciples declared Jesus as Messiah and now, Jesus explained that as the Messiah, he must do. As the Son of Man, he must be handed over to authorities. He must be tortured. He must be condemned, put to death, and rise again in 3 days. The disciples don't understand. Like 2 times before, the disciples continued to interact with Jesus as though he was the Messiah they were taught about by their parents and their religious leaders. The Messiah they thought that he was going to be. And so James and John come up to Jesus and ask to sit at the right and the left hand in his glory, because they know Jesus is the Messiah. In their minds, the left and the right and the left hand of Jesus are going to be places of power and authority and superiority. They're going to be sitting next to the physical ruler of Israel. And the other disciples know this too. And they're angry when they hear that what James and John have done. Now, maybe they're mad because James and John beat them to the punch. Maybe they're mad because they feel James and John are selfish. And why wouldn't James and John ask for all 12 of them to have these seats with Jesus? whatever reason they're angry, though, for the third time, Jesus reveals himself to the disciples, and the disciples are blind to the revelation because they try to experience Christ through their past experiences and understandings of the Messiah. And in their blindness, they try to deny the new ways of experiencing God, which Jesus is revealing to them. The disciples know Jesus so well and understand the tradition of the Messiah so well. But when Jesus clearly reveals to them a new aspect of Jesus as God and Messiah, they are blind to it because they're so focused on the aspects they already know and they're comfortable with. They knew Jesus as an ear, but yet when Jesus revealed to them the trunk, they continued to be blind to anything but the ear, instead of gaining a greater experience and understanding of God. And the disciples' blindness leads to the question, if the disciples spent every day for 3 years with Christ, learning from him and receiving first-hand revelations of God, and yet we're still blind to who God is, and we can physically spend every day with someone and be blind to aspects of who they are, then how blind are we to God? In what ways are we blind to God and the self-revelations God is giving us? How are we experiencing part of God instead of experiencing all of God as God desires? I had a coach in my college track team, Coach Fred Wiley. He had been at the school for over 30 years. He was close to 80 years old by the time that I was coming through, and his coaching technique would be considered old school. He was one where you push the athlete as hard as they could go. You keep the athlete. The athlete keeps training. The coach does not change the workout for the athlete, but the athlete gets better and improves themselves, and they work through the pain and they work through the injuries, or else they take time off and risk losing their place on the team. Now, he brought about results and he helped a lot of athletes improve, but because of his harsh and stern demeanor towards the athletes and the inconsideration of changing the workouts if the athletes are run down, he was not always the most popular coach in the world. One day, he must have overheard some athletes, or somehow heard of their complaints, because before practice one day he pulled us aside, the whole team, and said that he understood his coaching style reflected the demeanor of the athletes when he grew up, when he competed. And if we didn't like the way he coached, then we needed to learn to adjust to it or move on. Because he had learned what he had learned, he had been trained the way he had been trained, and that's the way he was. And he was too old to change. While he was speaking about his coaching techniques, it seems that his words also pertain to our spiritual lives sometimes as well. Most of us from a very early age learn about God and experiencing God in many ways, just as the little kids are down there every Sunday and in Sunday school every Sunday learning about God. We went to Sunday school. We learned from our parents and our family. We learned from youth group and from spiritual mentors and from personal experiences. But at some point, there seems to come a point in our spiritual lives when we feel that we have experienced God enough and we understand God enough that we're good. It's as if we say, I have experienced God, I know who God is, I am too old in my spiritual life to change. And then when we have new experiences of God and those experiences are foreign to us or challenge us, then we are blind like the disciples. We deny our new experiences and focus on what we know of God instead of what God wishes to reveal to us. Such as an experience I had in high school where within 6 months I had a couple of experiences that were very crushing for a teenager. I remember feeling like God had lifted me up just to drop me and have nothing to catch me underneath. I didn't understand why God would have me go through what I went through. This wasn't the God I knew. And so I felt alone in this time. And I felt like God was absent or abandoned me, or maybe even didn't exist. All because this experience was foreign to my understanding of who God was. Or maybe you have had a little more casual experience of God, such as in a sermon or a discussion with someone where an experience of God is shared that doesn't exactly line up with yours. So you deny their experience as not your own and move on in your life. So you are both happy being right, but never experience God in the fullest. No matter what the experience of God is trying to reveal God's self to us. So we can have a greater understanding of who God is and have a better understanding of our relationship. But it depends on our ability and willingness to experience God as God wishes. Because unlike the blind men, we have the ability and option to not be blind and to see and experience what we were previously blind to. We have the ability and experience. We have the ability to experience the whole God, which is God's desire for us. Sometime down the road, when I finally decided to no longer protect the part of me that wanted to strictly hold on to the God that I knew, and be blind to how I was experiencing God during those 6 months during high school, I discovered two things about God that God had revealed to me during that time and followed me. First, I learned that God was present through others. Although I felt alone, although I felt like God had abandoned me, God was actually with me and supported me through family and friends, particularly through a spiritual mentor who God incarnated God's self through to be with me during that time, to support me even when I doubted God's existence. And God makes positive, and secondly, I learned that God makes positive out of negative experiences. God used this time to teach me. I learned a lot of life lessons. I learned about relationships with others, reaching out to others for support, and the importance of doing so, and the importance of being comfortable with who I was. And I also learned about discerning God's call, which really came in handy later on in life. And my relationship with God grew deeper at that point because I knew God wanted to me. I no longer knew God as just a tail, but I also experienced God as a leg that was always there to hold me up and support me when I was under great pressure. Experiences like this continue our whole lives, because we are never too old or too knowledgeable or too experienced to have our eyes opened by God and receive a revelation from God. But it involves us being ready to, and choosing not to be blind to these experiences, and instead being ready to have our eyes opened by God and ready to take on all that God reveals to us. God desires for us to know God fully. But if we are blind to the aspects of God that are outside our past experiences and beliefs, then we will know God as a tusk or a belly instead of as a complete elephant. God is ever revealing God's self to us. So open your eyes to God's revelation, because it can happen anywhere, anytime. If someone says something that contradicts your understanding of God, don't blow it off or deny it, but sit with it and see what you can learn about God. If you hear a sermon that you don't agree with, or you don't even agree with this sermon today, don't immediately block out the message, but wrestle with it and see how it challenges you to experience God a new way. Or if you have an experience that completely goes against your understanding of God, pray about it and allow God to reveal to you what God wants you to understand about the one who created you and died for you. Our closing hymn today is Amazing Grace. It's a classic hymn that is probably the favorite of most of you, or at least is well known by most of you. It would not surprise me if some or most of you could sing at least the first verse from memory. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Got some good pipes in here. Now, for all of us, this song has a personal meaning from experiences we've had in the past. But when we sing it together today at the end of the service, instead of just singing it as you have before, reflect on whether the last phrase of that first verse speaks the truth about you. Do you see, or are you still blind? Do you experience God as an ear or trunk? Or are you open to seeing God the elephant? If you do see, then continue to see what God is revealing to you about Himself. And if you are still blind, then open yourself up to allowing God to open your eyes and experience all that God has to reveal to you. Experience the whole elephant.